You probably imagine that life as an ancient human was a non-stop, grinding fight for survival. Every waking hour spent desperately hunting, gathering, and clinging to life from dawn to dusk. But the evidence points to something that sounds almost impossible. Your ancient ancestors may have had more free time than you do. More hours to rest, to talk, to make things, to simply sit and do nothing, than the average person staring at a screen after a long workday. The people we picture as living the hardest lives imaginable might have worked fewer hours than you will this week. So if they weren't grinding every hour just to survive, what on earth did they do all day? Stay with me, because the answer paints a picture of daily life you never saw coming, and it might just change how you feel about your own. Let's begin by throwing out the cartoon. The image most of us carry of the ancient human as a desperate, starving creature clawing at survival, every single moment, collapsing exhausted at night, only to wake and do it all again, is, according to much of the evidence, largely wrong. When researchers actually studied how the hunting and gathering way of life works, following the rhythms of peoples who still lived close to that ancient pattern, they found something that genuinely surprised them. The core work of staying alive, of finding enough food, water, and shelter for the day, often didn't consume the whole day at all. By many estimates, it took only a handful of hours. Some researchers have suggested the essential work of food getting could take as little as 4 to 6 hours a day, in decent conditions. And then it was done. The rest of the day belonged to them. Now, I want to be honest with you, because the truth is more interesting than a fairy tale. This was not a constant paradise. There were lean seasons and hard times, droughts, brutal winters, stretches when food was scarce, and the work was desperate and long. We've covered those harsh moments on this channel, and they were real, but those were the exceptions, the difficult chapters, not the everyday rhythm. For much of the time, in reasonable conditions, the daily reality was startlingly different from the nonstop grind we imagine. So let's set aside both the cartoon of endless misery and the fantasy of a perfect Eden, and do something better. Let's actually live one ordinary day, hour by hour, exactly as your ancestors might have, from the moment they woke to the moment they slept. I think you'll be surprised how much of it you'd envy. So let's begin where their day began. At dawn, the sun comes up over a small camp. A handful of people begin to stir, wrapped in hides around the gray, warm remains of last night's fire. And notice, right away, the first extraordinary thing, the thing you lost this morning and didn't even know it. There is no alarm, no clock, no jarring sound dragging them out of sleep at a fixed hour someone else decided. There is no schedule waiting to pounce, no list of urgent tasks, no boss, no appointment. Just a day, a whole open day stretching ahead under an enormous sky. Their morning begins slowly. They gather by the fire, coax it back to life, share a little food left from the day before. They talk. They wake into the day rather than being thrown into it. For most of human history, this unhurried, natural waking was simply how a day started, and it is something almost none of us will experience this week. And there is something deeper hidden in that gentle start, something your body still remembers. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans woke with the light, in tune with the sun and the seasons, sleeping and rising on the rhythm their bodies were actually built for. No sudden jolt from a screaming device, wrenching them out of deep sleep before dawn to rush toward someone else's schedule. They rose when they were rested. Their whole sense of time was different too. Softer, looser, tied to the sun's arc across the sky, and the turning of the seasons rather than to minutes and hours chopped into rigid blocks. A day wasn't a container to be filled with tasks and measured against a clock. It was simply the span of light between two sleeps, to be lived as the day itself unfolded. That freedom from the tyranny of the clock, from the relentless artificial dividing up of time that rules every modern day, is one of the quietest and most profound differences between their world and ours. They own their time in a way we can barely conceive of because their time was never sliced into pieces and sold or scheduled in the first place. It simply belonged to the day, and to them. And if this is already making you a little envious, if a morning with no alarm and no schedule sounds like a small miracle, then do me one favor. Tap that subscribe button right now. This channel is for people who want the real story of where we came from, not the cartoon version. The people who suspect that the primitive past might hold something our modern world has lost. You belong here. Now stay with me, because eventually the day's real work begins. And here is where the biggest surprise lies. As the morning opens up, the group turns to the essential task, getting food. And they split the work in the pattern found across so many of these societies. Some go out to gather, and gathering was the quiet backbone of survival, providing the reliable majority of the daily food in many groups. They move out into the landscape they know intimately, collecting plants, roots, fruits, nuts, seeds, eggs, honey, Small creatures reading the land like a map they've memorized since childhood. Others go to hunt, tracking game across the country. A task that took more skill and more luck and often came back empty, but delivered a feast when it succeeded. And here is the thing to understand. This work, as demanding as it was not a frantic all-day grind. It was skilled, purposeful, often social work, done in small groups, full of conversation and knowledge and reading the world. And in good conditions, it got the job done in a matter of hours. By early afternoon, often the food for the day was secured. The most important work was behind them, and the rest of the day was theirs. And it is worth understanding asterisk. Why asterisk it could take so few hours, because it seems to defy everything we assume about the hardship of ancient life. The answer is that our ancestors were not amateurs fumbling for scraps. They were the most expert foragers who have ever lived, carrying in their heads an encyclopedic knowledge of their homeland built over a lifetime and passed down over generations. They knew exactly where the right plants were in each season, exactly where the water pooled, exactly where the animals moved, and when. They weren't searching blindly. They were harvesting a landscape. They understood better than we understand our own neighborhoods. A modern person dropped into the wilderness would starve not because the food isn't there, but because they don't know how to see it. Your ancestors saw it instantly. That deep expertise turned what looks like an impossible daily challenge into something efficient. A few hours of knowledgeable, practiced effort in a land they knew by heart. Skill is what bought them their free afternoons. They worked less not because the world was generous, but because they were extraordinarily good at reading it. Think about how different that is from the shape of your day. For your ancestors, work was a burst of focused, meaningful effort, and then it ended cleanly, with hours of daylight still left. There was no staying on the clock. Once the food was gathered, no inventing more work to fill the time. Enough was enough, and when they had enough, they stopped. That single idea that you work until you have what you need, and then you are asterisk, free asterisk, is one of the most foreign and most enviable things about the ancient day. So the food is gathered, the hunters are back, and it is around midday. What now? Now comes the work that turns raw food into a meal, and this too was a shared and social thing. Around the camp, people process what the day has brought. Plants are cleaned and pounded and prepared. Meat, when there is some, is butchered and set to cook over the fire. There is a warmth to this hour, the camp full of people working side by side with their hands, the smell of food, children underfoot, the easy talk of people who have known each other their whole lives. And then the day's main meal shared out among the group, not eaten alone, not rushed, not at a desk, but together, as the fundamental daily act of a people bound by blood and survival. The sharing of food was sacred in its way, the glue of the group, a moment repeated every single day for 100,000 years. And this daily sharing was doing something far more important than just feeding people. It was one of the deepest bonds holding the whole group together. In these societies, food was very often shared out across the whole band, not hoarded by whoever found it. The successful hunter didn't keep the kill for himself. It was divided among everyone. And this wasn't just kindness, it was a brilliant survival system. Because hunting is unpredictable. The hunter who succeeds today may fail tomorrow. And the one who failed today may be the one who feeds everyone next week. By sharing, the whole group smoothed out the ups and downs of luck, so that no one starved on a bad day if someone else had a good one. Every shared meal was a quiet act of insurance, of trust, of mutual dependence. A daily reaffirmation that we survived together or not at all. Eating together, then, wasn't just pleasant. It was the group physically enacting its own togetherness. Every single day, turning individual luck into collective security, and individual people into one interdependent whole. And now, with bellies full and the essential work of the day already done, we arrive at the hours that would surprise a modern person the most. The afternoon, the free time, the hours that were simply asterisk theirs. Asterisk. So what did they do with them? They did what humans do when they finally have time. This was often the time for the patient craft that filled the ancient world, knapping stone into blades, carving and smoothing wood, working hides into clothing, weaving fibers, repairing tools and shelters, fashioning the countless objects a life required. This wasn't the desperate labor of survival. It was skilled, absorbing, almost meditative making. The deep human satisfaction of working with your hands to create and mend. And it wasn't all work either. There was genuine rest. People napped in the heat of the day. They sat and talked. They simply asterisk were asterisk, present in their world in a way our restless, scheduled minds can barely imagine. This unhurried afternoon, this stretch of genuine leisure woven right into the middle of an ordinary day, is perhaps the single biggest thing that separates their daily life from ours. They had time, real, open, unhurried time, and they had it most days. Picture the camp in those golden afternoon hours, because it is a scene of quiet contentment we rarely imagine when we think of the Stone Age. In the shade, an old man sits patiently working a piece of flint, tapping it with the focused calm of someone who has done it 10,000 times. Flakes falling away as a blade slowly emerges. Nearby, a woman scrapes and softens a hide, her hands busy while she chats with the person beside her. Someone is mending a tool. Someone else is plaiting cord from plant fiber, fingers moving without needing to look. A couple of people have simply lain down in the warm afternoon and drifted into a nap, and no one thinks less of them for it. Children play at the edge of the camp, half copying the adults' work, learning through imitation without being taught. There is no urgency in any of it. No one is watching a clock. No one feels guilty for resting. The work that gets done is the satisfying kind, making, mending, creating, and it flows in and out of conversation and rest and doing nothing at all. This was not idleness, and it was not toil. It was something we've almost lost the ability to picture, a productive, peaceful, unhurried afternoon, lived at a human pace, most days of a life. But the true heart of the ancient day, its richest, most human hours, came as the sun went down, because the evening belonged to each other. As darkness fell, and the fire was built up against the night, the whole group drew together into its glow. And this gathering around the fire, was the beating social heart of human life, repeated every evening across unimaginable spans of time. This was when they talked, deeply and endlessly, in a way we've largely lost. When the day's events were shared, the hunts recounted, the news and the gossip and the laughter passed around the circle. This was when the stories came out, the myths, the histories, the tales of ancestors and animals, and the origins of the world, told and retold, carrying the group's entire identity and wisdom forward through the generations. This was when the elders taught, when the children learned, when knowledge that couldn't be written down was passed from voice to voice in the firelight. There was likely music, rhythm, singing, the oldest human arts. There was closeness and belonging, and the profound comfort of being wrapped in your people in the dark. The fireside evening wasn't leftover time at the end of a workday. In a very real sense, it was the asterisk point asterisk, the warm human center that all the day's work existed to protect. Sink into that firelit circle for a moment, because it may be the thing your ancestors had that you most quietly long for. The dark presses in all around, and against it stands this one pool of warm flickering light, and everyone you love and depend on is inside it with you. An elder's voice rises and falls, telling a story everyone has heard 100 times and no one tires of, the familiar words landing like comfort. Faces glow orange in the firelight, leaning in, laughing, listening. A child dozes against a parent. Someone taps out a rhythm. A few voices join in a song older than memory. The talk winds from the day's hunt to an old joke, to a tale of the ancestors, to a lesson slipped in so gently the children don't notice they're learning it. There are no screens pulling anyone away, no walls separating anyone off, nowhere else to be and no one wishing they were elsewhere. Just the fire, and the dark, and the people. The whole group woven together in the oldest ritual there is. Every human being alive today is descended from people who ended their days exactly like this, night after night, for longer than we can comprehend. It is perhaps the most human scene there is, and almost none of us will ever truly know it. And then, at last, sleep, natural, deep, taken when the body wanted it, under the stars, with the fire watched through the night, only to wake, gently, and begin the whole rhythm again. A day that began without an alarm and unfolded without a clock. A burst of skilled social work to secure the day's food, often finished by afternoon. A shared meal. Then long hours of making, resting, talking, and simply being. And an evening given over entirely to story, teaching, music, and the deep warmth of the group work. And then a rich human life. That was the ordinary rhythm for most days across most of the human story. Now, let's be fair and complete the picture, because I promised you the truth, not a fantasy. This life had a hard edge too. The lean seasons were real, times when the food didn't come easily, when hunger stalked the camp and the search for food stretched long and desperate. There was danger from animals, from accidents, from sickness with no medicine, from the raw exposure of a life lived outdoors. Children were lost. The old and the injured suffered in ways we're now spared. It was not a soft life, and it was not free of fear. But here is the crucial point. The asterisk daily rhythm, asterisk in ordinary times, was still one of enough work and ample rest, not the ceaseless grind we imagine. The hardship came in chapters, in bad seasons and bad luck, not as the relentless texture of every single hour. And in exchange for enduring those hard chapters, they lived, most days, a life with more open time, more deep connection, and more natural rhythm than almost anyone reading this has ever known. And it is important to hold both of these truths at once, because the honest picture is neither the misery cartoon nor a rose-tinted dream. A bad winter could bring real hunger, and a serious injury with no medicine could be a death sentence. And the grief of losing a child was something many parents knew. These were not soft lives, and it would be a lie to pretend otherwise. But the mistake we usually make runs entirely in the other direction. We imagine that every asterisk day was that desperate, that the whole of ancient life was one long emergency. And that simply wasn't so. The emergencies were real, but occasional. The ordinary days, the great majority, ran on that gentler rhythm of enough work and ample rest. It is a bit like how a modern life includes genuine crises, illnesses, losses, disasters, without those crises being what daily life is . For our ancestors, the hard seasons were the crises, and the enviable rhythm was the daily life. Both were real. The point is simply that the daily life, the actual texture of a normal day, was far kinder and far richer than the nonstop struggle we picture. So let's finally answer the question we started with. What did ancient humans do all day? They woke without alarms and moved without clocks. They spent a few focused hours getting what they needed, and then they stopped, because enough was enough. They made things with their hands, and rested without guilt, and talked for hours. They shared their food and their fire, and they gave their evenings to the oldest and best of human things: stories, teaching, music, and each other. Their day was not built around getting more. It was built around getting enough, and then living. And that single difference may be the most important thing this whole story has to teach us. And now let's kill the myth, the deepest one of all. It is the belief, buried so deep we rarely question it, that our ancestors' lives were nothing but misery, and that everything we've built since is pure gain, an unbroken climb from suffering to comfort. The truth is more complicated and more humbling. Yes, we've gained astonishing things: medicine, safety, abundance, an end to many of the terrors they faced. But we may have also lost something real: the unhurried day, the enough is enough, the hours of open time, the fireside evening, the deep and constant presence of our people. Our ancestors were not miserable primitives to be pitied. They lived a life with a different set of trade-offs than ours. And in some ways, in the things that matter most to a human heart, theirs may have been the richer bargain. We didn't simply climb out of a bad life into a good one. We traded one kind of life for another, and we gained enormously. And we lost some things too. And we've spent so long celebrating what we gained that we forgot to notice what we left behind. So the next time you're rushing through a scheduled, screen-lit, clock-driven day, racing from task to task with no open hours and no fireside, and barely a moment of true rest, stop for just a second. And remember what is written into you. You are built for a different rhythm. The body waking to an alarm was shaped by 100,000 years of waking to the sun. The mind straining under endless work was shaped by days that ended when the work was enough. The heart starved for connection was shaped by evenings wrapped in the warmth of its people around a fire. That older rhythm is still inside you, the deep human template of what a day is supposed to feel like. Your ancestors lived it every day, for longer than we can imagine, and some quiet part of you has never stopped missing it, which is exactly why a morning with no alarm, an afternoon with nothing you must do, or an evening among people you love feels less like a luxury and more like coming home at last. But this raises a question that cuts even deeper, because if their daily lives were so rich in rest and connection, and ours are so full of work and hurry, then what exactly did we trade it all for? And when did the bargain begin? The answer takes us to the single most important turning point in the entire human story, the moment we stopped living this way at all. And that is the story we open next.